being an 11th round pick coming out of University of Oregon in 1975, and that was actually the same draft Fred Dean, who just got inducted to the Hall of Fame, was in that same draft. Knowing that you drafted low and knowing that you were going to have to fight for a roster spot, what approach did you take to help you succeed and be able to be a starter for so many years?
Well, there were two things, again, that impacted me. Number one, I had a very good friend and a Christian brother who went to the University of Oregon, and his name was Tom Graham, who preceded me into the NFL. He was a third-round draft choice for the Denver Broncos, and he's a person who I respected wildly. He had told me that when I became a senior and I was about to go into the pros, he said, George, he says, I've been in the pros for a couple of years now. I've seen what it consists of, and if you don't make it as a professional athlete, I'm going to be gravely disappointed. Now, that said two things to me. You look at yourself, and me, I have a degree of modesty. But to see how someone else who you respect sees you and sees your talents and your abilities, number one, I never wanted to let him down. I did not want to let him down. And number two, if he has that much faith in me, well, why shouldn't I have equally that much faith in me? And so when I got to Giants training camp, I looked around, and before I left, I told my wife, I said, honey, I'm not quite sure how long I'll be here, but it's probably going to be a couple of weeks. Then I'll probably be released, and I'll come back, I'll finish up my teaching degree, and we'll go from there. I got off the bus in Giants training camp in Pleasantville, New York, and immediately I saw the gross disparity between an 11th round draft choice, those are drafted in the 11th round, and the first and second round draft choice. We got off a bus. We had to get all our gear off the bus. First and second round draft choice. They came up in a limo. Someone carried their bags.
Even in that time. Wow.
And I looked at it and I said, wait a minute. This is not fair. That's a we're all rookies. You know, they haven't paid any dues.
That's absolutely right.
And boy, when I saw us in uniform and I saw the disparity, or more importantly, the similarity in abilities, I said, my goodness, there's no reason that the rest was history. I mean, I felt that all of us had a admission ticket. Whether any of us were going to stay or not depended on us. And I fully intended, after seeing what I had to compete with, because there was so much parity back in those days, even though they were perceived to be the golden boys because they were drafted higher, you made that difference. Everyone was equal out on the field, and that's what I decided to do at that point in time. And I made a conscious decision that I was not going to be released from the Giants for lack of either my dedication or my contribution.
Wow. And when were you a starter? When did you start starting for the Giants? First year starter. Wow. Okay.
I was voted as the New York Giants Rookie of the Year in 1975.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's leapfrogging 10 other people who were drafted ahead of you. And you were considered to be the best draft that they had as the Rookie of the Year that year. So I was very proud of that accomplishment, and it goes unnoticed. But, again, it's a validation to me. And whenever I see something that might have an obstacle associated with it, or it might have some greater degree of difficulty to me, I use that as motivation, as encouragement, because you know what? It's all here. And if you have enough confidence in yourself and you have enough positive ability, there's nothing that you can't accomplish.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. And I love hearing that all the time, making sure I hear that from external sources, that's for sure.
It's true.
Now, during that time, the late 70s, the Giants were going through a transition period. A lot of young players like Harry Carson were coming up, and of course, later on in the early 80s, Lawrence Taylor, Carl Banks, Jim Burt, pretty much the nucleus was being formed. But the Giants, actually, the record... record was 42-73 before Coach Bill Parcells took over in 1983. Now, so talk about the differences during that time through the late 70s and early 80s, and when Coach Parcells took over, the foundation he set.
Prior to Bill Parcells, or the early area, we had no confidence, and we absolutely had no expectations either as players. I mean, we went out and we sort of went through the motions because we didn't know what pro football was all about. We knew that we were perpetually the doormat of the industry, and as far as we were concerned, that would continue, until some great revelation would come about. So every year we played down to our expectations as a team. There was no leadership. There wasn't anybody out there with any profound willingness to go out and say, we're going to drive a stake in the ground and we're going to change things. That didn't happen until Bill Parcells came on board.
Wow.
Now, what changed between that previous era and Bill Parcells was Bill Parcells came in and he had a different philosophy. He didn't look at us, first of all, as just expendable pieces of meat. He looked at us as commodities, precious commodities. and he looked at us as individual commodities. In other words, we weren't all widgets, and they weren't all irreplaceable. And you used the term earlier about foundation. And so what he said to us, he says, I am going to start with the foundation of leadership. And he says, to that foundation, I'm going to add the key ingredients because these people are going to anchor my foundation. That's going to be Harry Carson, who recently was inducted to the Hall of Fame. And very deserving
2006.
so. Absolutely. Phil Simms, who was going to anchor that offense and be the leadership out there. And George Martin, who was going to be sort of like the combination of both because in addition to being the team captain, I was also the team consultant against drug abuse. I was also the team chapel leader. Eventually, I was the player representative for 12 of my 14 years, and I went all the way up to become the president of the NFL Players Association. So there was a lot of leadership there. And then he began to put the pieces around us, like you said, Lawrence Taylor, Jim Bird, Carl Banks, Phil McConkey, Mark Bavaro, Joe Morris. And, that was his philosophy. And one day he really called me on the carpet one day, and I'll tell you a very quick story. We had a young, brash rookie out of Notre Dame by the name of Gary Jeter. And he was one of those ones that before he even put on a uniform, we sent the limo and we gave him the big contract. So there was a lot of envy there. And so one day he was jumping off practice constantly, and we as veterans were sitting there snickering and laughing. We knew that Parcells was going to really give him what for at some point in time. The third time he jumped off sides, Parcells called everybody up to the center of the field, and we knew that he was going to lay into him at that point in time. And what he did is he turned to me and he says, George Martin, he says, if this man jumps off sides one more time, I'm holding you personally responsible. And I was, stop. He says, you're the senior member of this club. You've got the most to gain out here than anyone. Pretty soon your career is going to be over. So you can ill afford to be sitting over there snickering while this young man who you should be tutoring and you should be guiding him and directing him, you should be a leader and not a follower. Now that did two things, which were profound. Number one, it said to the whole masses that if Bill Parcells is going to come down on this veteran, like that, this sacred cow, then none of us are sacred. So nobody's beyond Bill Parcells' wrath. The second thing he did, which I thought was genius, he was absolutely right. And so I took this kid under my wing, and we corrected that problem because he was right. I had the most to gain as the elder statesman as anybody. So that's the team concept. Everybody should be pulling together, and you shouldn't, because sneakering at someone's deficiencies or their lack of success is divisive, and that's not a successful equation.
Right. Wow. That's why Coach Parcells is.
Yeah, Coach Parcells, right.